the word tolerance. I mean, that used to be the word back in the days, and still you hear a lot of people talking about that we should be tolerant, and I'm like, no, we should not. We should be respectful. We should be accepting. We should be understanding, not tolerating. Again, tolerating is a pressure cooker. I just put up with you until I can't do it anymore.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
On today's episode of Better Thinking, the topic is intercultural learning and cross-cultural psychology. I'm talking with clinical psychologist, and I hope I get this correct, Marcela Lapertosa. And she is an incredible person, human being, who's really looking at improving this world, improving this life with regards to how people can appreciate and genuinely learn about each other's cultures, backgrounds, and experiences. It's very, very fascinating to hear how she's done so, how she's changed over a lifetime and her own experiences in working with people from all cultures around the world. So you're going to really enjoy this. There's a few amazing parts of looking at the differences between Australian culture and other cultures. Marcela's Argentinian and I've got a Serbian background as well, so it's quite interesting to hear all the different viewpoints and perspectives. So enjoy. Welcome back to Better Thinking Podcast. Today's guest is Marcela Lapertosa. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And she is the Senior Manager of AFS Education and Development for Australia. It's absolutely wonderful to have you on the show to talk about intercultural learning and cross-cultural, psychology and awareness and respect. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nesh, for having me. I'm super excited to be here today.
Likewise. Now, before we get started to talk about these, important topics about intercultural learning and how we get different cultures to appreciate each other and the like, maybe we could start off with a little bit about AFS and what is AFS and how you got involved in it and a little bit about the organisation, what it's trying to do, what it stands for, and so on.
Yeah, perfect. So AFS has an interesting story. So it actually goes way back to the First and Second World Wars. And it was a group of American men who could not join, for different reasons, the military. So they started driving ambulances to pick up the wounded from the field. And that's why it was called American Field Service. Now we just give the AFS for it. But this group of men, after the wars were finished, they started having a chat and thinking, what can we do? With what we learned, what we've seen, and they saw really horrible things and they didn't want this to happen again. So they said, what is our role now moving into times of peace, and how can we keep peace? So they decided to start exchanging students, basically bringing up German students to Jewish families in the States and vice versa. And there were a few other countries involved in the beginnings. And that's how the modern AFS was born, which is a not-for-profit, non-governmental, voluntary organization which promotes intercultural learning opportunities for people to develop the skills to create a more just and peaceful world. And that, in easy words, is mainly these days we exchange 12,000 students around the world every year, and that involves about 8,000 host families and 50,000 volunteers supporting all these students and families around the world. So, and you were saying, how did I get involved? The funny thing is, well, I was a customer. I was a student of AFS in 1994, 95. So I went from Argentina to Denmark for a one-year program in high school. And that's when my journey started. And I've been pretty much doing anything from early volunteering, supporting students in my local chapter or city in Argentina, to nowadays working in Australia for the national office. And I've also worked for the headquarters of AFS International in New York.
Wow. And where did you go for your experience, cross-cultural experience?
I went to Denmark for 1 year.
Wow.
So I lived in a small, I don't know, I thought it was small back then, town in an hour out of Copenhagen called Næstved. and I lived with a Danish family, and I went to school every day. So it was, a fantastic experience.
And what prompted you to go out and do something like that? Like that's a pretty big thing for a young person to do.
Yeah, I think I would have given you a different answer if you asked me 25 years ago. Now looking back, I have had years of processing this, and I think it's interesting because I lived in a very conservative Catholic town in Argentina, and my mom was Jewish and my dad was Catholic, so I was kind of the odd one out. And so I always was intrigued by differences and different cultures. That was my understanding of cultures at that point, right? So, and I always wanted to travel and see the world and see how people were different and behave different. And so I went to my mom and said, I want to do this. And she was like, yeah, well, let's do it. So that's how it started. I think when you're 16, 17, you don't think much about what you're going to do next. You just think that something is a cool idea and you go for it, right?
Is that the reason when, like, your 16, 17-year-old reason, is that what it was? It was a cool thing to do and you experienced something that's out of the box?
Yeah. I met a few people who had done it or were about to do it, and I was like, this sounds like fantastic. I'm going to meet people who are different, and I'm going to learn a new language, and it's just a completely different life. And I was just intrigued. So, and it's interesting because when I came back from my exchange, I started studying psychology. And I think it was the same reasoning behind it. I was like, well, I want to understand why people think the way they do, why they behave the way they do, and why are we all different, So I've always been intrigued by differences. And then, so I was a clinical psychologist for a long time, children's psychologist, and then eventually I went to do my master's in cross-cultural psychology, and I was like, well, I kept going and going. So I think my early experience as an exchange student and living in another culture really had a strong influence in my whole career afterwards. Yeah.
Do you think there was a predisposition for you to go down that space, that you were a little bit more open-minded, or that the on the openness scale, you're a little bit higher? What do you think drew you towards that versus maybe another student? Is there something that kind of attracts people to an AFS type experience, or do you think AFS kind of is available and open and it can be similarly accessed by all? How do you kind of play with that idea?
Yeah, I think, I hear you. I think, well, you have to be open-minded. If you know that you're going to be, okay, I don't know if it's only open-minded. You have to be comfortable with differences, or with the idea that you're going to face differences or ambiguity, or, you have to be a bit of a risk taker. I don't know if everyone who applies to go on an AFS program is aware of that. Again, because you're 15, 16, I don't know how aware of it you are, right? But I do think that you need to, I think myself in particular, I felt like, yes, I was open-minded. I was like, in my head was like, there's more to the world than this, And I think I wouldn't say I was born with this predisposition. It's not a gene that you have. I think my family was very liberal and open-minded, and they had moved from a big city like Buenos Aires to the city where I grew up. They came from different religions, and so all that stuff was already going on in my family. So it was already a family that was interested in being with people who were different. So I think that helped me think, and also there was a lot. My mom loved traveling, and my grandparents loved traveling, and we had family in Israel. So all this idea that there was a world was always there, But I think when you say what attracts people to this, because I think it also has changed over the decades, let's say, right? I think there was a time where it was in the late 90s. I think it was like the cool thing to do. It was like for people who wanted just to experience something different. And then later on, it was the more academic kids who wanted to do it. And I think at some point it was like, oh, all the outgoing kids wanted to do it. But now I'm seeing more and more that actually introverted kids want to go on exchange. I think, and it's because it's different reasons. It's like you are either open-minded or ready for this, or you think that this experience is going to make you open-minded and ready for risk. Does it make sense?
Yeah. I'm also hearing that element of somewhat of not really knowing what's ahead and that there's an adventure. It's kind of like saying, I am open-minded to a different culture, but some of this is very adventure-driven as well, potentially. I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of guessing.
It is. It is an adventure. And I guess, again, these days it's pretty much, you choose exactly the country you want to go to. But back in my days, you didn't have many choices. You had to provide a list and you go where you go.
I saw the extraordinary list in doing research for our chat, and even a little country like Serbia, where I'm from, is listed. And I was like, what? Serbia doesn't usually, get the list. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. How amazing.
Yeah. AFS Serbia is actually quite strong. It's not very big, but it's very strong, and it's a fantastic experience. I think, we have 60 plus countries where you can go. I would love for participants to go to think outside of the box and not just go to the top 10 that everyone wants to go to. But that, again, when I was 17, I could only look at those top 10, right?
Of course. What else do you do? What are the top 10 just obviously not exactly 10, but what are the most popular ones for obviously, the younger folk?
Well, the top 3, right? The top destinations are the US, Italy, and Germany right now. But then there's Japan, Argentina, Brazil, Thailand. Thailand is not a big hosting destination, but a big sender. So they send a lot of participants around the world. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
In AFS, they would like to go to Australia and New Zealand as well. But because we are an exchange organization, not an international education organization, there is limitation on how much students we can take in Australia and New Zealand. So there's a huge demand, but there's just not enough spots available.
Before we go into that space, because I think that's interesting to try and figure out what you mean by, an exchange rather than an education provider. So hold on to that thought.
Okay.
But I had the thought that I didn't want to miss the early days, because we touched on that, bringing German and Jewish young persons together. Is there anything that you've read about how those programs went? Because obviously, some time ago there would have been a different generation, a different obviously the historical freshness of events that had occurred, and so on. That's a brave thing to do. That's kind of groundbreaking.
Well, you know what? There's plenty of evidence of the long-term bonds that were created. Up until these days, I can tell you stories forever, because it's just a 16, 17-year-old living with a family. It's just, there's a bond, there's love there, there's a relationship that grows. It's it's calling mom and dad people that you've never met before. So that is fantastic. And back in the days, there was this understanding, and not only for us, but pretty much for everyone who was working in this space. I think most of the exchange organizations were born after the war. There was a bit of a lot of the NGOs were born after the war, right? International NGOs were born after the war. So, but there was this understanding that just meeting each other or meeting someone who was different and having a bond will give you the skills to navigate a complex world and to create a more just and peaceful society, right? And in the last 20 years, I would say, there's been a lot of research and evidence showing, well, you know what? Yes, the bond is fantastic. And yes, there is strong relationships. And yes, anyone who has lived this experience says that how much it has changed their lives, right? And it has impacted the career you choose. And sometimes the partner you choose and so many other things. But are we really changing the world? Are we really creating a more just and peaceful society? And are we really better at dealing with differences? I became very fascinated by this research because basically it's telling you that the contact theory, I think that's what is that what it's called? Yeah, it's the contact theory. This idea that just the contact with the difference will make you change doesn't work. That can reinforce the stereotypes. That can be your only one experience with that person from that particular group, right? Let's say you're walking on the streets of Argentina and then you get robbed, and okay, that's what you think Argentinians are, from then on. So you were in touch with someone who was different, but then that can mark whatever you think about that group. You can generalize very easily, and that goes for any religion or any cultural group. So what we've learned in AFS, but not just AFS, in the field of intercultural learning, is that contact needs to be reinforced by reflection. And not any reflection, it needs to be a facilitated reflection. And when I say that, it's like it's not only you have to have the experience, but then you need to take a step further, which is, what do you make of this experience? And then once you've reflected on it, what are you going to do with this, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing is the facilitation. So if, for example, let's pretend you are an AFS student and I'm the person, you come to Australia, I'm the person looking after you, and you come to me with some issues that might be stereotypical concepts about Australians. And instead of helping you debrief that or reflect about it and show you that, well, that was one Australian you met, not every single Australian, and how does that compare to this or that, etc. If instead of doing that, I go, yeah, you're right, I agree with you, then there's the end of it. Exactly, right?
So the host families need to be, in some sense, taught how to do facilitated reflection to kind of be able to take additional perspectives, not reinforce one viewpoint, but rather encourage many viewpoints and ask the young person to think beyond that one experience. And that could also be in a positive sense, where they might say, wow, all Australians are so happy and accommodating and wonderful. And it might be, sure, and Australia is probably no different to any other place in the world where, some people can be abrupt or, difficult or, we still have every flavour and every, experience that every other country has as well. It's not rose-coloured glasses. We're not trying to go out and say everyone and everything is perfect, but rather say, I want you to see the breadth, the gamut of human experience, irrespective of culture, but obviously in breaking cultural stereotypes.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you know what? The stereotypes are both negative and positive. Yes, it can go either way, right? And it's also, we always talk in AFS about the concept of the iceberg as a metaphor for culture, right? And you can live 5 years in a different culture and never go underneath the tip of the iceberg. You just see what's on the surface, what people eat, how they behave, what music they like, how they dress up, etc. But you never wonder about their values or why they do what they do. And that's what the real intercultural learning happens, when you can go to the cold waters of the iceberg and start exploring those concepts. And you don't need to be there for 3 years. That's something that can happen in a very short period of time, is if it's been properly designed and properly facilitated. And I love that you mentioned the families, because about 5 years ago, a bit more, I would say about 10 years ago, we did a study with AFS and Dr. Mitch Hammer, where we realized that our students were improving. So they would go for a year on exchange program, and yes, they would improve their intercultural skills, but it wouldn't be a massive change in their intercultural skills. And so when we started looking at the data, we realized that, well, we are putting all our efforts on the student, but what about the family, where the student spends 90% of their time They're with the families, they're not with us. What about the school where they spend the rest of their time? And then also the volunteers. So AFS is a volunteer organization. So every student is assigned a volunteer support person, someone who helps them facilitate this experience, take that learning to the next level. So then we realize, well, there are all these players that we need to be working with. Otherwise, that very deep intercultural learning is not going to happen. And that's when we came up with all these different learning programs, right? Not only for the student, but for the host family and for the volunteer. And it's amazing how we've started seeing change already, how the students are really improving, how much they are connecting with the learning and with the experience. I don't know if you're familiar with the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity, but it's a model developed by Milton Bennett. And it's a model that tells you how people react to differences. And basically, the reactions go anywhere from denial, where you can't see it, right? You don't care about it, you don't see it, you just ignore it, right? And there's plenty of evidence of people traveling around the world and just not seeing the differences, right? They go and eat at McDonald's in every country they go to. I can see you smiling and going, yeah, I know those people, right? And they can't be bothered with the differences. And then the next step in the continuum will be when you're in polarization, because the difference is so threatening that you polarize everything. It's them versus us. And that can be, again, positive or negative. So it can be like, I'm superior to you. Like, I don't understand how these people live like this. What sort of culture is this? That's why they live like this, etc. So very judgmental about the others being worse than you. But it can also take the other way, which is, I wish I was like them. This culture is amazing. I want to live here. This is the best country in the world, and I can't see anything faulty with it, right? But still, even though it sounds positive, it's still the us versus them dynamic. And that's where the world is in at the moment. We are in this us versus them dynamic. And then we have the third step in the continuum, which is the minimization. And that's where, yes, the difference is there and it's threatening, but instead of polarizing, what we do is we just focus on the similarities. That's our coping strategy with differences. And this is how most of the, exchange organizations or international education started in the 50s, right? This thinking that we need to come together and focus about what we have in common. And that's going to fix it, right? Let's focus on the similarities. And it's a good thing. It's a great thing because we are looking at the positives, right? But it's not long-lasting. At some point, the difference still emerge. You can't ignore the differences. It's like assimilation in a culture, it's like a pressure cooker. At some point, those differences are going to show. You can't ignore them. And they're important because they're values differences, right? And then you have the next step, and I'll wrap it up here, but I want to give you a sense of this. So the next steps is acceptance, which is when, the differences are still there, but they're not threatening anymore. I understand that the differences are because of values, that there are deeper roots to the differences. I'm curious about it. I want to learn about it. And I can engage in dialogue. I don't want to ignore them. I don't want to fight them. I don't want to minimize them. I want to be part. And that's where the world should be leading, right? That's what we need to make a more just and peaceful world. But what the studies were showing is that our students were getting to minimization, which is a nice place to be, but we weren't moving them towards acceptance. Make sense?
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking, as you're talking about my family migrating to Australia, and I think I very clearly remember, polarization comments from mum and dad that I would then adopt, and it was, us versus them, and the them were Australians and the us we were the Serbians, or to broaden it, we ended up becoming, the Europeans, or the word that we would use here at school were the wogs.
The WOG.
The wogs, wogs versus skips.
Okay.
And we used to play soccer, wogs versus skips to see who wins, but there is very much a polarization. And although that was played with a bit of jest later on and obviously some humor to it, but then I remember my parents sort of moving more to that minimization, focusing on similarities, and in actual fact being somewhat. I remember mum making a comment about like the space of like having canapes at a party rather than having to go out and make this big spread of antipasto and soups and the main dish and desserts and cake and so going. Maybe these odd strange Aussies know what they're doing. That sounds pretty damn good. And these days, but we're talking 1982 to now. I don't know how many years that is off the top of my head, but it's taken a long time, and I really see this acceptance feature. It's almost like mum and dad, and it's not that they almost. I think they call Australia just as much home as they do Serbia. Serbia was the home that they came from, and now their home is Australia, and maybe they have two homes, in their mind, but there's this amazing acceptance. But it's taken a lifetime. I mean, it's taken a whole generation in some sense that they've probably, and I can't obviously speak for my parents, but they've wrestled with it. And I know as a young person myself, I didn't know which camp I belonged in. I speak Serbian at home. I do, English as a second language at school, and in my eyes, I looked different, even though I didn't. But in my eyes, I did. And that I somehow didn't fit in. And you initially go out and say, well, polarization. I'm Serbian, so I identify as Serbian. And then later on, completely kind of pushing Serbian away, and no, I'm Aussie. I'm not Serbian. The Serbians are are terrible, and I don't want anything to do with that culture. It's a polarization in the other direction, and as an older person, kind of going, in actual fact, I love both, and I accept, the beauty in both, and the shortcomings and the challenges in both. I'm an Aussie with amazing heritage, and I'm kind of both, and I can play both. I can be as much Aussie as I like, and I can be as much Serbian as I like.
Yeah.
I've got some different sort of shades of character and being. It's quite fascinating to be in the center of all of it, and maybe not in the center, but moving through it. I suppose it's actually not the center. It's being on the edge, then in the middle, then on the side, then you're kind of just evolving and moving. You don't know where the hell you are, but trying to kind of, at least as you say, reflect.
I know, but I'm loving because you just gave me a perfect life story of how this model works, right? And I always see it the second generation is, and you gave me the example again, is very much affected by this because your parents went through a process. But I always think, can we help these young kids early on, to understand that they're both? You don't have to drop your Serbian identity. You don't have to drop your Australian identity because you have both. You have a gift. So, and that's fantastic. And you shouldn't be ashamed of that. You should be proud of that. And I love how you were describing, now the shortfalls in both of them. And the strength in both of them. And you can also adapt your behavior to both of them. If you go to your mom's house, you don't behave the same as if you go to an Aussie friend house, right? You know how to behave where, right? And that's the fascinating part of this. We've been recently doing some workshops at schools in Victoria with primary kids, year 6 students. We were doing some workshops on intercultural capabilities. And I found it fascinating that in a multicultural classroom, some kids didn't even know that the kid sitting next to them was from Thailand.
Wow.
And I was like...
That was year 6?
Year 6 students. So, because we would do an activity where everyone had to bring an object from home, which showed their culture, right? And it was beautiful because you had all of them being very proud of something that their moms or their grandmas gave. One of the kids brought some cookies that he baked with his nonna, and it was just beautiful. And a Chinese girl brought a brush to do Chinese calligraphy. It was just a beautiful moment to watch where they were all proud of their heritage, right? But then at the end of the round, after that, one of the girls said, wow, I didn't know he was from Thailand. So what made me think is we have a multicultural society, we have a multicultural classrooms, but we are not having the conversations. We are coexisting, but not engaging. And I always see this agencies called multicultural this, multicultural Queensland, multicultural New South Wales, multicultural events. I want to have intercultural events. I want to have an office for intercultural affairs, not multicultural affairs.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean about the difference between those two? Because that's an important distinction.
It is, because multiculturalism is the coexistence of differences, right? There is like 10 different groups coexisting in the same space, but they're not interacting much. They're not engaging. They're not having conversations. It's just about coexisting. And intercultural societies are those who allow you to show your culture, but also learn the local culture and also learn the other cultures that are around you. It allows for you to kind of bring difference to the surface and be proud of the differences and be ready to learn about the differences, not just go underneath the tip of the iceberg. It's not just the food at the multicultural festival. That's tip of the iceberg. I've tried Serbian food. I've tried Italian food. I've tried Korean barbecue.
What do you think about the Serbian food?
It's really good. It's really good. Hey, I'm Argentinian, so we have this European background, right? Let me tell you, I had a group of Indonesians these last 3 weeks in Brisbane. They don't think Turkish, Serbian, or Greek food are any good. They were like, I was saying, oh, that's delicious. I love the mezze plata and all that. And they were like, that's no food.
What is that?
Where is the rice? but that's the thing. It's tip of the iceberg, But what do we know about the values? What do we know about the history? What do we know about how they live here, So I think that's a huge difference. I love the concept of empathy. Most times people think that empathy is like the golden rule. The golden rule is you treat others the way you want to be treated, right? That's what every Christian has learned in this life. But that's not empathy. Empathy should be the platinum rule, which I love this concept of the platinum rule, which is treat the others the way they want to be treated. And that takes extra skills. That takes extra understanding. That takes extra effort. That means you really need to get to know the other person. You really need to understand where that person comes from to really be able to treat them the way they want to be treated, right? And that doesn't mean, because sometimes people go, oh, well, then my values don't matter here. No, yes, they do, because hopefully the other person will do the same, and it doesn't mean you need to drop your identity. No, you should be Serbian and Australian and be proud of being both. In the old times and the huge migration of the beginning of the century, it was all about assimilating. It was another time. There was no internet, no phones, no nothing, right? I'm thinking of all the immigrants in Argentina. There was no chance of staying in touch with your family, right? So it's like, and if you wanted to become Australian or Argentinian or American, it was all about learning the language, make your kids, don't speak the language, your original language at home, because your kids need to be Australian or need to be Argentinian. And then over the years, every government and every researcher realized that that doesn't work. That confuses children, that why shouldn't I speak the language of my parents? Does that mean I shouldn't be proud of them? Why shouldn't I be proud of them? So
well, it's fascinating. My wife, when her family came to Australia, my wife was born here in Australia, but they've got a Polish background. My in-laws chose to give my wife a Polish name, but make it an Australian. So rather than Natalia, it became Natalie.
Okay.
And that was such a beautiful thing to do, because it said, I'm going to protect you from judgment, because we want to give you the best. And when we think about it, my wife changed her name back to Natalia. But that comes from a different world. You know,
Absolutely.
1982 is a very, very, very different. 84 when my wife was born. Was a very, very different world to 2020 that, you know, is just around the corner. And you know, there's a huge difference, you know, as to even this idea about, you know, multicultural versus intercultural. And yeah, intercultural is more of a we word rather than multicultural being still a them word, you know, like we have them in our culture and we kind of tolerate them, you know, versus we accept them. As a matter of fact, they are part of us. It's an using game, you know, it's an acceptance game rather than a tolerance game.
Oh, I love that you brought up the word tolerance. I mean, that used to be the word back in the day, and still you hear a lot of people talking about that. We should be tolerant, you know.
Crazy,
and I'm like, no, we should not. We should be respectful. We should be accepting. We should be understanding, not tolerating. Again, tolerating is a pressure cooker. You know, I just put up with you until I can't do it anymore. It's a complete. I love the example of your wife because, you know, it's not the same Natalia than Natalie. It's not, and of course, parents were coming from a place of love and protecting their children, and they felt that the best future they could give their children was, you know, turn them into as Australian as possible, right? But not realizing that, you know, the best version of Natalia was both Polish and Australian.
Well, it's quite funny. Even when I was naming my daughters, and we gave each of them a middle name. With each of their grandmothers, and my mother's name Danica. You know, it's a very strong Serbian, beautiful name, gorgeous name, but the moment you put in, you know, a middle name Danica and a Nikolic, you know, all of a sudden the whole thing becomes this big Nikolic, big Serbian name, and it's like, you know, she's the closest thing that my family has to being Australian, you know, like she's the third generation now. But she's got probably one of the heaviest, you know, Serbian names, and it's like, but this is now going to be celebrated, you know. So she will go to a very, very different experience, a different school, and her experience will be, you know, vastly different than it probably was, you know, back when I went through, or obviously the fear of, you know, what our parents would have, you know, feared or expected, you know, might occur in those schools. So it's fascinating to see this space move, as you say, from basically, you know, the world wars to now how AFS has evolved.
Yeah, and, you know, it's interesting. I'm married to I'm Argentinian, married to an Australian, and the same with my kids. I give them both. The first name is a Spanish name, and the second one is an English name. So Catalina May and Franco Luke, right? I mean, and you can hear Franco is a bit Italian as well, but that's the Italian background in Argentina. But for me, that was very, very important because by the time I had kids, I was very conscious about all these things. So I wanted to make sure that they had the two names in their identity, because we are psychologists. We know how important names are. Names are a big part of who you become. You know, it's not just a random word. So I was very intentional about that. And also now, you know, I speak Spanish to them, and it's funny that both of my kids were slow to start speaking English. And then one of the daycares that they went to told me, oh, maybe because you speak too much Spanish, kind of telling me I shouldn't do it. Right? Yeah. And the other one was like, oh, it's fantastic. Don't worry, keep speaking Spanish, right? And I didn't care because I knew the theory that all bilingual kids are slower to start speaking, but once they do, they speak two languages. And I just thought, how many moms have been told over the years to stop speaking their native language? And how bad that is for any children's development. You know, any children should be spoken in the language of love, right? And the language of love is your mother tongue. It's not another language. And I just wish every single immigrant or, you know, expat in the world would know that. You know, your language of love is your mother tongue. Don't speak to your kid in another language, because the one you have is the important one.
Why? Why do you think we hide from all these things? Why do you think as a young boy at a period I rejected
Yeah.
my Serbian heritage? What do you think? Obviously, you work with so many, young persons and families and families that open up their homes.
Yeah.
What is it that makes us reject difference? That we see different and we kind of almost be threatened by. What do you think? What are your
Well, I think why we reject it as children is because we want to belong. We want to belong, and if the society we want to belong to doesn't love differences, then you have to erase them. So that's why I think it is starting to be a different world, especially here in Australia. So if you will go to school now, your daughter, for example, goes to school now, it's a different school. It's a school that is asking kids what are the languages they speak. It's asking kids to share something about their language. It's schools that are asking them to share about their culture. It's bring your parents, bring your grandmothers to tell us about where they come from. So if you are in an environment that is celebrating that, you wouldn't be ashamed. You wouldn't hide. The opposite, you will be proud. And that's the environment we need to create in schools that we didn't have in the 80s or 90s, So I think that's one of the reasons children don't hide a bit. And, my kids are pretty much at some point when my first daughter started school and I would be speaking Spanish in front of other people, she would just go, no, like, don't do it, right? But I didn't care. I just kept talking and now she loves it, and now it's her thing. And every time we go to Argentina, she comes back, show and tell is about Argentina, and everyone knows she speaks Spanish, and everyone knows that we are the Argentinians. These are the kids from other cultures, but it's not that multicultural, the school we go to. But I just think, and for your parents, think about our parents. They wanted to belong. They wanted us to belong. They want the best for us, and that means you need to be as Australian as possible. You need to go native. I call it go native, like where you go full Australian to the extreme, So now about difference, I think there is a lot of research about, and I'm not an expert in this at all. Let me just do the disclosure here about early in life, how animals react to differences. Like facial recognition or, what's perceived as being threatening is something that doesn't look like you. So it is like a human-like reaction to differences, to the unknown. Is
it that an animal doesn't is afraid of what doesn't look like them because the first thing they see as what they believe they look like, because obviously animals don't have mirrors.
No,
right?
Yeah.
But if they see mum and mum has got fur on her face and so on and so forth, and let's just call it a dog, the dog goes out and sees that and says, I therefore must be that. That's mum. That's safe. So that's a safe face.
So these animals that look like these are the ones who are feeding me and looking after me and protecting me. All of a sudden, there is another one that shows up that doesn't look like this. So there is a reaction, right?
And usually mum's face is also a smiling face. It's not only a face that's, that I know I'm safe with, but it's positioned in a particular way that tells me I know that to be safe, and whether it's a smiling or whether it's one of maybe it's oozing love or I don't know. Yeah, you're probably just oozing love all the time. So I don't know what the face of love looks like, but I'm sure children do. And they know what their gaze looks like and what that sensation. But anything beyond that at least starts to trigger, is this safe or not? And so there's this belonging, and belonging means sticking to my tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a tribe. Yeah, absolutely. But I think, I see it again with international students here. There is, Australia is one of the main destinations of international students in the world, together with US and UK, massive destination. And I always see all these reports about the contribution that international education does to the economy, right? $4 billion to the economy, thousands of jobs, blah, blah, blah. I just wish we start seeing reports of how good international education is for our societies.
Yeah.
I just want to see, we know
We don't
it's good
measure
for the
that.
economy.
Yeah.
We don't measure that, right? I want to see how much our societies are changing because of that, but I'm not sure they are. That's my concern, because you go around here, the biggest groups of international students are from Asia. And, you can hear the stereotypes on the other side about the international students hanging out together, not speaking English. It's like it used to happen with the immigrants at some point, and now it's all about, also the international students, because there are big numbers of them. And all the stereotypes about, they're good at math, or they're here for the degree.
That's right. They're rich. They're good at maths. They're going to go into medicine or law.
They don't want to
they got it
integrate.
made. That's what it is, right? That's the Asians. Leave them alone.
Yeah, and every time I hear stuff like that, I cringe. I'm like, here we have a massive opportunity. We have thousands, I think like 500,000 of international students in Australia these days, in schools, at universities, in students' residence, in families, at work. This could really change. It's changing the face of Australia, but it could really change our societies, and I don't think we're putting enough effort on that yet. I'm starting to see some glimpses of we need to do more about it. I'm starting to see, Education New Zealand published a strategy last year, and it's the first international education strategy that has global citizenship as one of the 3 main areas. And I was like, this is fantastic. It's not just about go to another country and get a degree in another country or learn a language and meet people. It's about what are you going to do with that? What are the skills that you're going to develop? How are you going to change the world after this? You are privileged. Everyone who has had an international experience is a privileged person. So what are we going to do with this? And Australia is also moving towards that. There's a lot of strategies coming out now around global competence.
What does that mean?
Well, global competence is basically intercultural competence plus the action, I call it. That's my simple way of explaining it. But let me go a bit deeper on that. So, excuse me. So global competence there's 3 components. One is the understanding the world that you live in, understanding that the world is interconnected, understanding the issues that are affecting the world. The second component is being able to interact effectively and appropriately with those who are different to you. And that's the intercultural competence component of it. And the third piece is taking action for a better world. So you know what the world is about. You know what are the main issues. You know how to interact with those who are different, and you respect differences. Then you need to take action for the common good, right? And so that's global competence. And it's very much linked to the Sustainable Development Goals that the UNESCO has set for 2030, which is a set of 17 areas that cover anything from access to education, to clean water, climate change issues, etc. So it's not just take action on anything, but take action on these issues that are really pressing the world. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the PISA test. The PISA is it's an assessment by the OECD that what you hear in the news every couple of years. There is a big wave of people on the news talking about this, because it's the assessment that compares education rankings around the world. So how well the kids do in math, science, language, etc. So and once in a while there is a conversation about how the Singaporeans are the best, how the African countries do poorly, where is Australia sitting in this ranking. So it's a worldwide ranking assessing education, right? And last year, they started measuring global competence as one of the key skills. Yes. And, and it was fascinating because I think there's not a perfect tool to measure global competence, right? There's no, it's a competence is a combination of knowledge, skills, and attitudes and values. Some people would say, the Europeans would say values, but it's really hard to measure in a sit-down test for a year 9 student, right? But the fact that they are measuring is putting it in the agenda. It's saying this is an important skill. So not only you need to be good at math or language, you also need to be good at global competence. And interesting because it was optional. Some countries opted out.
Isn't that fascinating? Which countries?
I don't want to say it. I don't know.
Hopefully not Serbia.
No, I don't know about Serbia, but I think at the beginning, I think USA was one of them. But I have to go back to the recent data. But when it was recently announced, I think UK and USA were opted out of it.
Isn't that interesting? Maybe they were afraid of what it might look like, that it might go out and say, hey, we need to do better. I mean, I'm actually excited by doing poorly, because if you do poorly, it says something, and it says, hey, great, we're really ordinary in this. And because we haven't looked at it, before, this is a good opportunity to do something about it. And rather than going out and saying, well, if you don't measure it, it doesn't exist.
Exactly. But that's why I loved it, because I was, of course, it's not going to be good results for anyone, but doesn't matter. We have a benchmark. We say, okay, this is what we see. We need to improve that. And that's why I thought fascinating. I think the results haven't been out yet. I think they're going to be at the end of this year. But I would love to see it. But the good thing is that then, like the Department of Education in Queensland is about to launch their new strategy, and a huge component is global competence. And I know that similar ministries of education around the world are doing it. So they did put the issue on the agenda, and governments are worrying about it. And we should worry when we see things like Christchurch or any attack anywhere based on differences, being cultural, religion difference. We should be worried. It's telling us that we haven't done a great job with our society, so we should be doing more. So it's good that we are taking on the challenge. And will it be perfect? Not right away. Will we know what the answer to everything is? Probably not. But we are trying, and we are giving the message that we are trying, and it's important. For kids, it's like, yeah, good if you're good at math, but that's not going to change the world.
Absolutely, and we're not saying that one's better than another. We're saying they're all valuable. Maths is valuable, yeah. English is valuable. Art and science is valuable. And having global competence and intercultural appreciation and understanding and respect is important. Yeah. And et cetera, et cetera. It's not one or the other. It's almost like every time human beings touch something, we categorize it, and then it becomes all or nothing, and us or them. It says if you add another category, then you're going out and diminishing the others, and it's like we just keep falling back into the same problems. Yeah,
exactly. No, perfectly said. I can't add anything to it, because it's exactly that, right? And also I was thinking, about the host families, or homestays. Sometimes they call it homestays, but there's thousands and thousands of Australian families out there who have an international student in their homes, and there's not much being done with them. Still the strong focus is on the student, because the student seems to be the customer, the customer of the school, the customer of the university, the customer of the organizations. What about the families? They have someone very different to them in their homes 24/7. Yes, they are bonding most of the times, but we could be doing more. We could be doing way more. And I think sometimes it sounds like too big of a task. But we have to do it. And, we do it in AFS, and we're very proud of that.
What can we be doing that's more? What are some of the practical things that, listeners could take away? How can I do it better? And I've maybe had some greater exposure than others in whether it be my own life or having travelled, overseas. What can we do better?
I always say just be curious. Don't be afraid of being curious. And I know that sounds a bit abstract, but practical examples. I had a group of students recently from Indonesia, and they were saying a few things. Like I identified that they weren't being very direct in their communication, and they were also very afraid of dogs because dogs. It's not common to have dogs as pets in Indonesia, and also so there were three things: the communication, the dogs, and eating with a knife. So they eat with fork and spoon, right? In Indonesia, they usually don't know how to use a knife. So basically what I thought is like, there is an opportunity here. So I actually sent a WhatsApp message to all of them and said, homework for today at the dinner table, I want you to talk to your family about these three things. I want you to show them how to eat with a fork and a spoon, and I want them to teach you how to use the knife. And I also want you to talk to them about the dogs. What do dogs mean in your culture? Why are you afraid of them? Are you allowed to touch them or you are not allowed to touch them? What's the relationship between dogs and Islam? Because they were telling me some stories. So bring up the conversation. And I want you to learn more about how important the pet is in the house and what does a pet mean for the family. And the third thing was like communication. What does it mean when you say yes? And ask them, what does it mean when they say yes? It was three very simple things that it could have been just an anecdote, like, oh yeah, I don't know how to use the knife, oh yeah, my family, my student always says yes, but he doesn't mean it. And it could have just been that, a funny comment. But why not take the extra step? It could also have been
a 3-hour conversation about, what it means to go out and say yes, and the respect and how you hold people of different, ages or genders or God knows what, like it could have been this huge, and it most likely, would have been if there was curiosity in
Absolutely.
that space.
And most of them did have the 2-hour conversation because next day I heard from the families, oh, you know what? We were talking with about that. I was like, yes. So yeah, it's a curiosity. It's like, and also I think what I've noticed is people sometimes are a bit afraid of asking, feeling that asking will be disrespectful. So better not to ask. But then when you don't ask, you're stuck with your stereotype, with your perception, what you think is the truth, right? There was also a long conversation about if you sleep with the lights on or the lights off. These basic things can trigger long conversations. So what we did in AFS actually, when we created the host family journey, we call it the host family intercultural learning journeys. We created these 2 or 3 questions every month that are sent to the student and the family to start conversations. And it could be anything from, what does it mean when you're in your room with the door shut?
Ah, yes.
And then you get the family and the student to answer the question individually, and they come together and have a chat. What That's does beautiful. It mean? Yeah, so when you are embarrassed for something you did and you want to make amends, what do you do? Right? So all these things are simple questions, but are based on intercultural learning theories of the things that create conflict between differences, like communication styles. You mentioned hierarchy, the distribution of power, the difference between collectivist and individualist societies, if the emphasis is in the I or in the we, all those things. So there's no reason why all universities and all schools with international students shouldn't be doing that.
It's fascinating because this intercultural sort of, awareness and appreciation, in so many levels can be reflected in every single home in your street, your neighbour, because we all have a culture in our home, and if I think about it just for myself, there's this really important big meaning about how you say goodbye to friends who are leaving your home. And for me, it's really, really important for me to walk every guest out and walk them to their car and to stand there until they drive off and to keep waving, as they drive off. And it's all about respect. It's all about saying you are important and I respect you and I care for you. And it doesn't matter if it's freezing cold, if it's, raining, if it's blowing a gale. It's important that I do so. But having kind of, seen my wife's approach, I have more flexibility and fluidity in how I might approach that, and so I can change it, I can vary it, and it's not easy to do so. But even something as small as that, how tied up it is in us. I have this kind of. It just feels like I'm just saying, all right, bye, get out of my house if I don't walk the person all the way out. When in actual fact, it doesn't mean anything. It just means bye. But in my head, my experience, my feeling, there's so much more. So, those questions that you say are just so pointed because it just goes out and opens up, this curiosity and kind of understanding what does it mean. And I'm sure not every single Serbian human being, this is probably, the culture of what was in my household. It's not a Serbian thing. It's a Nikolic household thing that I remember that we always did, and it was important to do so. But not that anyone ever said it was important. It was just how it was always done, and I knew what it meant. Well, at least I think I knew what it meant. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, but that's the point. What culture is passed on generation after generation without explanation.
Yes.
It's like no one gives you a book of what your culture is. You just go into it, right? And sometimes people say that culture is the water to the fish. You don't know how important it is until you get your head out of the water and you can't breathe.
Yes.
Right? So you grow into it. You just know how to do it. And most of the times, unless you're faced with different cultures, you lack self-awareness sometimes. Self-awareness is the number one step in developing intercultural understanding. You first need to know who you are and what's important to you before you go into others, right? So we always say there's 3 steps. One is the self-awareness, then the awareness of others, and then is the building the bridge between you and the others. So self-awareness is key. And I was just thinking when you were saying about how you say goodbye to people. Actually, I never thought of that as a topic, but now that you brought it up, I'm going to start asking people how they say goodbye. and there might be an issue because I get frustrated with my husband sometimes. I take so long to say goodbye. So maybe there is something about it that I'm not seeing. But for example, we do Argentinian barbecues are very well known for a lot of meat.
They're delicious, I can tell you.
But it's also a very social, cultural event. It's a big thing on Sundays in Argentina. It starts with 7 a.m. going to shop for the meat. Come back, start the fire. The fire takes a few hours to be ready before you put the meat on. The meat takes a few hours to be cooked. Anyway, it's a long process. But so my husband built an Argentinian barbecue in our backyard. And when we first moved to Australia, when we first had the barbecue, that was like 8 years ago, I started noticing the difference is in if we had a group of Argentinians coming to the barbecue or a group of Australians coming to the barbecue. And I started making a bit of a joke about it. But now I'm so good at changing my behavior depending on who comes. Because the first time we had Argentinians for a barbecue lunch, it was all the time was 6 p.m. And my husband says, what time are they leaving? Because I need to mow the lawn. And I just started laughing. Like, I don't know. When they come, I know when they go. There's no finish time.
Yeah, there's no rules here about finish.
You go when you go, when there's no more food, I don't know. And then the Australians, it's like clockwork. As soon as they finish dessert, they disappear. It's just magic. And so at first, I was offended that people left right after dessert, But then, I adapted and I started understanding, and I started asking, when is the right time to leave? And people were saying it is polite to leave after dessert. You don't want to overstay. You don't want to offend your host by abusing their hospitality, Whether for Argentinians is the longer you stay, the more polite you're being. Because
it's
you're
an insult to leave early. It's like,
Exactly.
we've prepared all day for this, and this is served for you.
Host, you're a good host. I want to stay here forever. Exactly. And then another thing is about when Argentinians come, I turn on the fridge. I have full stock for children and drinks, etc. Because Argentinians just come, if they have children, they expect you to feed the children as well, right? But when Australians come, I don't need to turn on the fridge because everyone brings their own esky with all their drinks and their ice and their food for their kids, and they live with the esky again. So it's just like the expectation, the Argentinians, somehow there is this unwritten or unspoken expectation that I'm going to look after them, every single one of them in every single aspect. And that means that they owe me. And eventually I will go to their house and I will bring nothing because I've done it for them. I can be maybe in 20 years. It can be next week. It's just an unspoken rule. That's the reciprocity of the
water.
Yeah, But Australians, no, it's just they have to bring something. And every time I say don't bring anything, they just can't take it. They will bring something. Doesn't matter how many times I say. Because there is like, okay, we are even, right? I brought this, you brought this, we are all even. That's my understanding. However, I've had some conversations with Australians and we have a good chat and a good laugh about all these issues because, like you said, all Australians are different. And some of them will go, well, I would stay way after dessert. And the others are go, no, you have to leave after dessert. Anyway, so it's just, intercultural learning, it is not easy because you need to get out of your comfort zone. You need to be a bit brave, in asking questions and being curious and being brave about, being embarrassed sometimes doing the wrong thing. But it can also be a lot of fun and very rewarding, very rewarding. Like, I would tell people next time you're in a room full of people different to you, go and engage, Is it Christmas? Is it Christmas party at work? Go and ask how they celebrate Christmas. Does Santa come on the 24th or on the 25th? Who brings dessert in the family? When do you put up your Christmas tree? Do you have a Christmas tree? Do you celebrate Christmas? If you don't, what is the main celebration in your family?
And I can tell you, Santa comes on the 7th of January.
I know, in Serbia.
Yeah, that's right. That's when we do Christmas.
No, but it's the Three Kings come on the 6th of January in Argentina. Do you have the Three Kings?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I don't know what the Kings do.
7th of January, you see? So there is a fascinating conversations beyond weather. What's the weather like?
Absolutely. I think we could talk for forever, but I think that one of the big takeaway messages for me is to try and be embracing, to be curious, to try and find out more. It's not just about exposure to or contact with other people from other cultures, but rather more of a intercultural, experience where it's us, we share a conversation of curiosity and understanding, and not necessarily try and achieve anything, but, learn and find out more, and through that is the mechanism of appreciation or acceptance, if we can call it that. And it's one thing to do an exchange program where you're just in a country rather than you're part of that family and that experience and that immersion, but to find out more rather than to look for differences or similarities. It's actually to be curious, and because as you're curious, you question your own stuff as well.
Absolutely. Oh, that was a beautiful summary. Yeah, be brave, be curious, and suspend judgment. Be there for the learning, for the engagement, and you will surprise yourself.
Absolutely. How can people find out more about AFS if they're interested?
Well, it's afs.org. AFS.org is the international website, and from there you can go to any website in the world. If you want to find out specifically about AFS Australia, it's afs.org.au. And we have there anything available for young people who want to go on exchange, families who would like to host an exchange student in their families, schools who would like to engage with us and work on some of these workshops that I mentioned, or some activities for professional development for their teachers, but also for their students.
Does AFS work in all states in Australia?
Yes, we are in all states.
Well, you'll be getting a call from the ACT soon.
Fantastic!
I tell you what, I think it's just fantastic. I know that's one of the things that I loved about this year, even at my daughter's preschool, was that the teachers there organised a. I don't even know what we named it, but what they named it, or I can use the word we. It was bring a cuisine from home, and obviously from your cultural background. And it's fascinating because we can do that because every classroom has an array of human beings that come from different, parts of the world. And so it's fascinating, that we've all got, a good half of us have got accents and, bit of broken English and, all sorts of things to, being first generation or third generation or, ninth generation or whatever it might be, Aussies, it's fascinating. And it's just a great conversation to have to belong to the one. So you'll definitely get a call from the ACT, that's for sure.
Well, I would love to. I was there recently and it's always a pleasure to go back to the ACT. What
age groups do you guys do?
Well, exchange programs from 14 years old to 18 for exchange programs. But workshops we do at schools, anything from any primary or high school or universities. And right now, actually, we are in the process of placing our students for February 2020. So we have students coming from Italy, Germany, Switzerland, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, France, for either 6 months or 10 months next year to go to school here in Australia. So
fantastic.
Yeah, there's plenty of opportunities.
And can people also contact if they want to be a host family?
Of course, they can contact us. Everything is on the website, afs.org.au. They can also find us on Facebook or Instagram. Either way, to be a family, to send your kid abroad, to bring us to your school, anything that inspires you from this conversation, let's have a chat.
Perfect. Now, before we finish up, I'm going to try and nail your name with the rolling R, and then you can correct me, and this can be part of our intercultural sort of curiosity. Marcela.
The second one, Marcela. Just one roll of the R.
Marcela.
Perfect.
There you go. I finally got it.
I have it easy with you, Nesh.
Well, mine is actually Neboisha.
Oh, Neboisha. Oh, that's a bit harder.
It's Neboisha.
Neboisha?
Yeah, a lot closer.
Say it again.
Neboisha.
Neboisha.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, that's why it's Nesh, because who's going to go out and start throwing out Neboisha in class? It's never going to happen.
No.
So I gave a lot of the relief teachers hell by making them call me Neboisha, but obviously with our normal teacher it would just be Nesh. But very, very much appreciated for your time today, and I think what you've described today with regards to what AFS does is absolutely incredible. Really, I think every state in Australia should be contacting to say, we want you guys at our school to do these workshops, and for those who want to become host families or have that conversation with your children about whether they want to go out and experience an adventure, but also a cultural learning experience and an awareness building sort of space. I would highly encourage it. So it sounds absolutely incredible. And when my kids are ready, I think I'll be having those conversations with them. So thank you very much for your time today and for coming onto the show.
Oh, thank you, Nesh. It was fantastic. I love the conversation.
Thanks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please support it by going to iTunes and putting a review. subscribe, share it via social media, and tell others about it. Start a conversation. It's listeners like you that make this able and possible, and why we bring in these guests to go out and share their knowledge and resources. And just lastly, if you are a psychologist and you want to go out and be part of a bigger team, develop your experience and get into some exciting work, come to strategicpsychology.com.au/careers and reach out. I'd love to hear from you.